Hey everybody, let's talk Geauga Lake. That's right, Geauga Lake. Geauga Lake was an amusement park located in Aurora, Ohio, less than an hour east of Cleveland. Now, this park opened in 1887, and then in 2007, the original land which housed the rides closed for good. And then in 2016, the land that the former SeaWorld Ohio and then later Wildwater Kingdom occupied was shut down as well, which left Northeast Ohio without a regional amusement park or water park of this nature in almost 130 years. So with this video series I'm going to be releasing, we're going to do a tribute to the classic amusement park that is Geauga Lake. We're going to do 3 videos coming, starting with this one, where I rank all of the coasters that operated at Geauga Lake, followed by my personal take on the demise of the park, that's video 2, and then video 3 will be a tribute to the spirit and the legacy of the park.
Where do you go when you're looking for fun? For the kids, for you, for everyone!
Geauga Lake's the place.
For double loop, for corkscrew too, for rides and thrills just made for you!
Geauga Lake's the place.
Want 100 rides and things to do in Aurora, Ohio? There's a place for you!
Geauga Lake's the place. Make no mistake, Geauga Lake's as much fun as you can take. Geauga Lake's the place.
I gotta say, Geauga Lake holds a really special place in my heart. As a kid who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, I visited the park multiple times each summer. In those decades, I really think were the park's glory years. You know, after they expanded to the more of that regional local park that they became with SeaWorld right across the lake, as those two parks worked hand in hand together over the years. That's where I feel like the glory years were. I loved it in the 80s, the 90s. And we're going to talk more about that transformation from Geauga Lake to Six Flags and then back to Geauga Lake in the upcoming videos. But today I want to rank the 11 coasters that operated at Geauga Lake from the years 1980 until 2007. So they had to operate between those years, 1980 and 2007, to be on this list. If they closed during that time, they will also be on the list. So there were only 3 coasters that operated and closed at Geauga Lake before 1980, and I wasn't around for those, so we're not going to add them into the rankings. So let's get started at number 11, Beaverland Mine Ride. Beaverland Mine Ride opened in 2000 as one of 4 coasters that opened with the rebranding from Geauga Lake to Six Flags Ohio. This was a Zierer Steel family coaster. It was originally named Roadrunner Express and was later renamed Beaverland Mine Ride when Cedar Fair bought the park and lost any Looney Tunes licensing at that time. Now, the layout was known as a double figure 8, and one thing that this coaster was known for was its really long 20-car train. This ride could fit a max of 40 people per cycle, and the ride would actually give you 2 go-rounds through the course each time you rode. When this ride was installed in 2000, it was one of 3 identical models that were added to Six Flags parks that year. And when the ride side closed in 2007 of Geauga Lake, this coaster was moved to France's Papier Park as roller coaster, where it still operates today. Moving on to number 10, Headspin. This is a Vekoma boomerang that opened as Mind Eraser in 1996. Now, I personally am not the biggest fan of boomerang coasters, which is why this is so low on my list. I kind of find them jerky, somewhat repetitive, and with one-train operations, the line, when it's really busy, can crawl like crazy. You just feel like you're standing there forever. So Headspin replaced the classic corkscrew coaster when Premier Parks invested $9 million into the 1996 season. So the original owners, Fun Time, sold the park. Premier Parks took over, invested $9 million in that 1996 season. One of the things that they invested in was this Headspin, at the time Mind Eraser. and some other capital improvements that year. But when the park was sold to Cedar Fair in 2004, this ride was renamed Head Spin. And then when the park closed, it was moved to Carowinds and still operates today as the Flying Cobras. Number 9, Corkscrew. This standard aerodynamics model opened in 1978 near the front of the park and was one of the 2 original steel coasters with inversions that opened in the late 1970s at Geauga Lake. This coaster had the classic corkscrew layout found on many of those aero models back then, consisting of 2 back-to-back corkscrew inversions. When opened, the ride was originally white and then was painted black in later years. This coaster was known to only operate with 1 train due to its relatively short ride time. And then in 1995, the ride closed for good and was moved to Disney World in India, where it was also named Roller Coaster, just like the Beaverland Mine Ride was. But the ride is still known to be operating as of today. All right, let's move on to number 8, the Villain. Now, this is a surprise for maybe a lot of you who are coaster enthusiasts. Why is the Villain so low on the list? Well, hear me out. Many coaster fans loved the Villain, and I want to let you all know, and I have said this before in other videos, when it comes to roller coasters and theme parks, rides, shows, the whole experience is an energy for me. It's a vibe. I relate to the way certain things feel to me as a big part of how I live my life. That's a big deal for me. Energy, creating energy, enjoying positive energy. So it's not just about the physical feeling for me, and that's why yoga is in the name of this channel. It brings a level of a higher level of consciousness when I am experiencing things like this. And I have to say, the Villain always had a weird and rough energy vibe for me. It felt like it was shoved in an area of the park that used to be home to picnic groves before, and then open spaces before. It was a great place to relax, enjoy your meals that you brought into the park. I have great memories of picnicking there when you would walk to the left of the front gate where the Villain was built, but before that it was all picnic, and it was just a really great place to just enjoy. And then all of a sudden it felt like that roller coaster took over that spot and just it was like shoved in there. It was also widely reported, and I also experienced this, that the coaster got very rough even into the first year of operation. Now, the Villain was built by RMC, with Custom Coasters International being the designers behind it. It was a hybrid coaster, but it had wooden track, steel supports, so a little different than we might be used to with wooden supports, steel track like we get on the current RMCs. But this was also another one of the 4 coasters built at Six Flags Ohio in the year 2000. It was 120 feet high, had a drop of 108 feet. It reached 59 miles per hour in its out and back course. Now, in 2007, this ride also closed with the park, and it was demolished. I don't know, this just was never one of my favorites. Again, I always felt like it was rough and I was getting beat up, and it was just crammed. It felt very disorienting. It felt inconsistent to me. Just never one of my favorites. But if you love the Villain, good for you, because a lot of people loved it. Number 7, the Double Loop. This ride opened in 1977 as the very first coaster ever built that introduced back-to-back vertical loops. This was also my very first roller coaster as an adult, if you don't count the kiddie roller coasters I was on when I was younger. So it actually does hold a very special place in my heart. Aerodynamics built this coaster at Geauga Lake after the success of the original corkscrew model that was installed at Knott's Berry Farm in 1975. This coaster had a 90-foot drop, 2 vertical loops, and a helix finale. After this coaster was installed in 1978, the aforementioned corkscrew that I mentioned a few coasters ago was built, giving the park the distinction of being the first with multiple looping coasters. In 2000, when the park transformed to Six Flags Ohio, the ride was given a new paint scheme of purple supports, yellow track, and the original red train was painted purple. The original yellow train became a darker shade of yellow. The park also added a tunnel to the left turn out of the station that takes you to the lift hill. When the park closed in 2007, the coaster was sold and then scrapped. Number 6, Thunderhawk. In 1998, this ride debuted as Serial Thriller and was the second coaster addition to the park after the Premier Parks acquisition in 1996. Well, the first one being Mind Eraser, which I talked about before, which became Headspin. This ride is a standard SLC model from Vekoma that was built along the shores of Geauga Lake, the actual physical lake, and much of its layout was built over the water. When Cedar Fair purchased the park in 2004, the ride's name was changed to Thunderhawk, and it remained this namesake when it was transported to Michigan's Adventure following the park's closing. That's where it operates today. Not much else to say about this one here, except that I have been on several Vekoma SLCs, and while they are known to be quite rough, this one always seemed to run a little smoother than the rest. Number 5, Steel Venom. Now this roller coaster underwent a ton of name changes in its history. Opening with Six Flags Ohio as Superman Ultimate Escape, it featured an LIM launch, or linear induction motor launch, and it reached 70 miles per hour, traveling up a 180-foot twisted front spike, and then backwards up a 180-foot straight spike that has a holding brake, which, when operating, holds you for a second or so on the second backwards launch before you take the final launch up the front spike. In 2004, this ride was renamed Steel Venom when Cedar Fair purchased the park, but everything else about the coaster remained the same. The colors, the trains, everything. In a shocking move, Cedar Fair removed this ride from Geauga Lake before the park was closed. So it was removed in 2006, 1 year before the rides were all closed. And this ride opened at Dorney Park in 2008 under the name Voodoo. And then later at Dorney, the name was changed yet again to Possessed, which it is called to this day at Dorney Park. At the time of this video's recording, it is one of 6 Intamin-launched Impulse coasters left. Number 4, Raging Wolf Bobs. Ah yes, another classic Geauga Lake coaster being built in 1988 when Geauga Lake celebrated its 100th anniversary, with the addition of this coaster being modeled after Chicago's Riverview Park's Bob's coaster, which had a similar nature layout. The coaster cost $2.5 million at the time. The Din Corporation was hired to construct this wooden machine set back from the busy midways of the park, way in the back in the wooded area that took a few minutes to walk to, if you remember that, if you've ever visited, which I thought actually added to the suspense of the coaster way back when it was built. A 2-minute ride, this coaster originally featured PTC trains and then were later replaced by Gerstlauer trains, one of which came from The Villain and one of which came from Holiday World's Legend. Now, when the coaster changed to these trains, personally, I felt that the ride experience diminished. At that point, it was the beginning of the end. It felt more janky. It felt like the coaster trains were not gliding along like the older PTC trains were. The lap bars were really uncomfortable, and really, sure enough, a rollback occurred in 2007, causing a minor derailment of the last car with no injuries reported. The day this incident occurred was the final day that the Raging Wolf Bobs ever operated, and the ride was demolished after the park closed. Number 3, X-Flight. When the park transformed from Six Flags Ohio to Six Flags Worlds of Adventure in 2001, this Vekoma Flying Dutchman model was added, literally right in the parking lot of the ride side of the park. This ride was an identical clone of Batwing, which operates at Six Flags America, and also Batwing is the last remaining of this model left in the world as of now. While this ride was fun and unique, the loading and unloading process was very time consuming, led to long lines that moved at a very snail's pace, especially if it was in one train operation. Just like Steel Venom, this ride was removed after the 2006 season by Cedar Fair and was relocated to Kings Island, where it operated as Firehawk from 2007 to 2018. And let me just say this, as I mentioned earlier about the villain and the vibe, this ride never had a good vibe to me at Geauga Lake, Six Flags when it was there. It felt like it was just plopped in the parking lot. It was like, here you go, here's another Scream Machine. It was a cool roller coaster, and it was awesome to fly, but it felt more at home to ride it at Kings Island. It felt like it was placed in a nice area. It felt like the queue line was constructed very meticulously, and you weren't standing out in the beating sun waiting. It just felt much more of a vibe at Kings Island. The color scheme was different. It was red, and I really enjoyed it there way more than I enjoyed it when it was at Geauga Lake. Number 2, Dominator. Dominator opened as the longest floorless coaster in the world in 2000 with Six Flags Ohio, and still holds this record today as it operates at Kings Dominion. This coaster was originally themed to Batman, called Batman Night Flight, and had a Batman car replica outside near the queue line. With a 157-foot first hill and featuring 5 inversions, it showcased a massive vertical loop as well. The ride travels a max speed of 65 miles per hour and is an impressive 4,210 feet long. Now, when Cedar Fair took over this park, it was stripped of the Batman theming and renamed Dominator, and now operates at Kings Dominion under the same name since 2008 when it was relocated after Geauga Lake closed. Dominator, it really is one of the best coasters I have ever ridden, and if you get a chance to visit Kings Dominion, please do not miss this one. And you probably can't miss it because when you pull into that parking lot, Dominator is right in front of you on the left, and you will see it. It's awesome. And number 1, perhaps the most iconic ride of them all for Geauga Lake, the Big Dipper. Yes, John A. Miller, the legendary coaster designer, created this coaster in 1925, opening as Skyrocket, then renamed to the Clipper, finally renaming the coaster Big Dipper in the 60s. This coaster was a true treasure for Geauga Lake and coaster fans. It had a unique layout. The coaster traveled from the middle of the park, out and back through the original Kiddieland and the water park. Through all the years, the ride remained a standard for classic airtime moments, nostalgia, laughs, fun for the whole family. If you visited the park up through the 90s, you may remember the coaster running on a manual system with old levers. Remember those that the ride operators would push and pull to start and stop the trains? That was before the computer-controlled operating systems were installed. That was really cool. Unfortunately, even being designated an ACE landmark, this ride was demolished actually many, many years after the park closed, finally coming to the ground in 2016, almost 10 years after its last rides were given. Now, this ride is sorely missed by the coaster community and Geauga Lake fans, and I would say was the number 1 roller coaster for many of us at Geauga Lake. So I hope you enjoyed my rankings. Please leave me comments on what your memories of these coasters are, or if you got to ride any of them at Geauga Lake or at a park where they were relocated to. I love talking about Geauga Lake. I love hearing great memories about Geauga Lake. And I have 2 more videos, as I mentioned, in the works regarding this amazing park's legacy. So please give this video a like and subscribe to this channel so you will see the video come through as soon as it gets posted. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you on the midways or maybe on board your next cruise.